Closet, a Todd Mills mystery. Book 1. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 23. Todd just lay there in bed, his eyes open, his body not moving beneath the down comforter. For a moment he considered trying to catch the morning news on his small bedroom TV, but the morning light in his bedroom warned that it was already too late. After staring at the ceiling for 5 or 10 more minutes, he rolled his head to the side, saw the clock. It was just after 9. Well, he'd missed the news by more than 2 hours. Oh well, he thought. He should get up. He had to, but his arms felt weighed down and he just couldn't move. He hadn't slept this late in years. He had reason to be exhausted, of course, and he was sure that he hadn't slept this soundly in weeks. Most definitely not since the night before Michael and he had fought. His mind drifted over all that had occurred since that night. No wonder he was worn out. He mused, getting tired just thinking about it all. So, had he slept so soundly because he'd passed through the end of the beginning, or because he'd had sex with Rollins? Todd rolled onto his side, stared at the empty space. Christ, what had he done? Stupid. How? Rollins had really been here, and it had really happened. They'd started out there in the living room, and 10, maybe 15 minutes later proceeded back to this bed. And it had been great. Todd recalled the other man's body, the surprising bulk of his chest, the strength of his shoulders, the trim waist. How wonderful it had been to hold someone in his arms and to be held. Absolutely. Through all of this short, intense week, Todd had yet to realize how lonely he was already. And he recalled Rollins' sure, firm exploration of Todd's own body. How naturally and easily things had progressed. It was almost as easy as being with Michael. He thought with yet another tinge of guilt. Perhaps even a little bit more exciting. Or had that been because of the novelty? Sure, it had been exciting to touch and feel and kiss someone altogether new. There had been something odd about it, though. For while it had been passionate, it had also been a frenzied, so desperate. But what did it mean? Todd didn't know the answer to that one. Rollins hadn't stayed long enough. The act itself had been protracted. 3 or 4 times they'd neared orgasm, only to hang back and stretch things out. And then once they were done, Rollins had left, rather hurriedly so. When was it? Almost 3:30. He barely lingered afterward, barely said anything as he slipped out of bed and trudged naked back to the dark living room, where he gathered his clothes. Todd had followed a few minutes later, stood at the end of the hall, and watched as Rollins dressed, looking what? Angry? Todd had been so tired he couldn't really tell, or rather he'd noticed, but he'd been too exhausted to give it any thought. Instead, he'd given Rollins a final hug, seen him to the door, then collapsed into bed and blacked out in a deep, lost sleep. Despite how deeply he'd slept, Todd now felt nearly as exhausted as when he went to bed. He stared at the curtain-covered window and at the light that was seeping through the edges and thought, Michael is dead, and I screwed Rollins. Sure, but Michael had been killed almost a week ago. He was never coming back. It was just that, well, Todd wasn't ready to move on, to let go of Michael. Yes, that was right, thought Todd, realizing he was as depressed as he was exhausted. He wasn't ready to start picking up the pieces. Didn't want to be ready. Yet, Rollins had just dropped right in there, forcing a wedge right between Todd and the memory of Michael. So what had been on Rollins' mind? Why had he come over here in the first place? Rollins had claimed there was something he wanted to talk about. Something he wanted to tell Todd. Was that merely a ploy? A way to gain entry into Todd's apartment? And his emotions? And why had Rollins seemed so stern as he departed? Surely that had to do with his work. Perhaps Rollins was afraid it would get back to the police force, where word of last night's liaison might not fly too well. Then again, Todd wasn't still a suspect in Michael's case, was he? Surely the statements from that gas station attendant and the waitress at the chili restaurant had taken care of that, and surely there were no ethical questions involved. This wasn't like a shrink sleeping with a client, or was it? Then Todd wondered if the complicating factor wasn't much more basic. Did Rollins have a partner, a lover, a longtime companion, or whatever you called the person of the same sex you couldn't live without? No. He claimed earlier that he was unattached. Todd moaned and rolled out of bed. From the bathroom, he took his robe, the big white terry cloth one, and proceeded to the living room where he put on some music. As he turned toward the kitchen, he saw it, the blue towel, right where Rollins had dropped it after pulling it from Todd's waist. Todd had a vision of himself standing naked before Rollins in the dimly lit living room. Okay, it might be complicated today, but last night it was hot, definitely so. And he wondered when he might see Rollins again. What might transpire at that time versus what he wanted to transpire. No, he thought, he couldn't handle anyone new in his life. Not yet. In the kitchen, Todd glanced at his new answering machine. Even as he looked at the small white box, he saw the digital number climb from 5 to 6. 6 messages? How was that possible? He studied the phone. Oh, right. He turned off the ringer last night, and his machine had been silently answering the phone all morning. He shook his head and turned away from the phone toward the coffee maker. He'd deal with the calls later. For now, he'd tend to his number one priority, namely brewing some extra strong coffee. As usual, he'd taken his first cup of coffee in the shower, where he'd stand and let the water blast him into the morning, and then what? He supposed it was time to think about picking up the pieces. He should call Janice, see if there were any news, ask her if it was okay to contact Channel 7. Oh, and he had to call Stella. She'd called 3 times last week, but Todd had yet to phone her back. There was the delicate matter of his career, of course, and what in the hell would happen now? Could it be possible that everything would die down, that no one would give a shit about his sexuality, that he could go back to work? Was the world that wonderful, that generous? Perhaps, too, all this publicity might fuel interest in his career and propel him into another stratosphere, a la Harding and Kerrigan. On the other hand, his career might be over at Channel 7, and he might soon be interviewing in the boonies. No, that wasn't right. He couldn't go to a small town because that would certainly mean going back into the closet, and he wouldn't. Well, then maybe New York or San Francisco. Maybe he could get hired on in one of the new gay cable programs. As he was pouring that first cup of coffee, there was a solid knock on the door. He guessed who it was and was surprised to find himself smiling. Perfect timing. He'd just gotten up and the coffee was fresh, and maybe his visitor had picked up some bagels or muffins. It might be nice. And they could talk. He took a deep breath, exhaled. Michael wouldn't mind this, would he? No, absolutely not. Move on with your life, his ghost would say. Enjoy. I'll be with you in spirit, buddy. Just don't forget about the flesh. You gotta take care of the real part of your life. There was more knocking, and a voice called, Todd. Of course it was him, thought Todd as he put down the coffee pot and called, Just a minute. It's me. Yeah, that was him. Sure it was. The forceful knock was familiar, and who else just arrived up here on the 15th floor? With the recent exception of Cindy Wilson and Mark Buchanan, hardly anyone. His neighbors usually called before dropping by, and the guards downstairs, Larry and Bob, always cleared any visitors coming in. The security was good here, yet they obviously had let Rollins in unannounced, because he was a cop. Carefully holding his coffee with one hand, he unlocked the bolt with the other. An uneasy sense of paranoia came over him, and before he twisted open the door handle, he peered out the peephole, saw the very familiar figure, and asked, You're alone, aren't you? No, my mother's with me. Todd couldn't suppress a grin as he opened the door. Hi. Want some coffee? Sure. As Rollins brushed past him, Todd saw that he was carrying a brown paper bag. Muffins? Bagels? Just how serious, he wondered, as he followed Rollins into the kitchen, was this going to be from the start? He knew he couldn't handle a torrid affair. Not yet, anyway. Friendship? Yes. Companionship? Definitely. "You don't look like you slept too much," said Todd, an amused look on his face. He watched as Rollins deposited the brown bag on the kitchen counter and turned, his eyes intense and deep. Todd felt a shot of arousal clutch his waist. Or was it fear? He didn't know, couldn't tell, and he backed up slightly. "I didn't," replied Steve Rollins, his voice deep and scratchy. "And it doesn't look like you did either." Dressed only in his white terry cloth bathrobe, his hair uncombed and still tousled with sleep, his teeth unbrushed, Todd felt oddly exposed, or terribly vulnerable. He felt Rollins' eyes running down his neck and burning through his robe. Was this to be a replay of last night's union? I was just about to take a shower," Todd muttered, and then took a sip of coffee. "A little groggy?" "Yeah." "Where have you been?" "Nowhere. I just got up." Rollins stared at him and said, "But you weren't here. I tried calling. I switched my phone off last night." Shit, thought Todd, his heart pounding, his throat tightening. Rollins was moving toward him, his steps slow but sure. Yet Todd wasn't sure he liked this. Something was different. Not so easy, and he stepped back, felt the refrigerator at his back, realized he was cornered. "I don't think I moved a muscle since you left." With a nervous laugh in his voice, surprisingly faint, Todd added, "As if I weren't exhausted enough, you wore me out." "It was great, wasn't it?" "Yeah, but... Shh. But Steve..." "Rollins," he said in a hushed voice as he closed in. "Everyone calls me Rollins. I'm not sure I'm ready for this. Just put your coffee down." "But..." Todd set his mug on the counter and couldn't help but close his eyes as he saw the hand reaching out slowly. An instant later, he felt the sure, strong fingers of the other man wrap around the back of his neck. Todd gasped and leaned over, pressing his cheek against Rollins' thick, hairy wrist. He opened his mouth softly, bit at the skin, and then Todd sensed Rollins' right hand on the other side of his neck, and as Rollins began to knead and massage him, Todd's breath began to come in short, deep gasps. "Oh my God," moaned Todd. "That feels incredible." He reached up with his right hand, wanting to touch Rollins, satisfy, please him in some way as well. But just as his hand descended on Rollins' shoulder, Rollins removed it, gently pressing it down and back against the cool refrigerator door. "Just relax," instructed Rollins. "Just take from me." Todd tumbled into a nervous kind of bliss as the other man's fingers massaged his neck, the back of his head. With a deep, gentle, and circular motion, Rollins's strong, steady fingers worked their way over Todd's ears, up his scalp. Todd dreamily opened his eyes, saw how intently Rollins was inspecting him. "Close your eyes," ordered Rollins. "Just receive." Trapped in the corner of his kitchen, held captive by a deep surge of desire, Todd did as he was told, feeling the hands next to his forehead, next softly descending to his temples. A finger brushed over Todd's lips, and he lunged out at it, bit and sucked on it. But Rollins wouldn't be entrapped, and slowly, steadily, his hand moved down. A moment later, Todd felt the hands on his chest, then sensed his robe tugged totally open. Oh, Christ, he thought. Here was all of him, including the extent of his arousal, totally exposed, as easy to read as a thermometer. He couldn't help but reach out, couldn't help but open his eyes as Rollins' right hand skimmed over his stomach. But what was this? This was definitely different from last night, when the charge of injury had been coming from both of them. This felt lopsided, as if Todd was being used, nothing more. "No," realized Todd, grabbing at his robe, pulling it shut. They had to talk. They had to work things out. Perhaps, hopefully, there'd be time for this later. For now, it was all wrong. He didn't know why, he just knew it was. "Rollins," began Todd, pushing away. "This is a little too soon for..." "Please." "Don't," said Todd, pulling free of his grasp. Surprised at himself, amazed that he was breaking away, Todd grabbed his mug. He quickly crossed to the coffee maker, where, with a trembling hand, he poured himself a refill. "I've got to take a shower." His body surging with desire, his head churning with confusion, He rushed down the narrow hall, coffee splashing out of his mug and onto the beige carpet. He charged into the bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. Michael, Michael, Michael. He took a sip of coffee, stared at the door, then purposefully unlocked it. Not knowing at all what he wanted, he took another swallow of coffee, slipped out of his robe, then climbed into the shower. Coffee in hand, he set the mug on a back shelf and disappeared beneath a pounding stream of steaming water. Breathing as hard as if he'd just climbed several flights of stairs, he wondered if the door would be pushed open and a naked Steve Rollins would join him. Wondered, too, if that was what he wanted after all. Nothing happened, however. He was not disturbed as he bathed, and eventually the shower cooled his desire and warmed his flesh. He washed and shampooed, then stood there, the water beating against his back. Drinking more coffee, he was relieved to feel in control once again. Control? Fuck that, he thought. For so long he'd been so tight, so worried. He had to let go. Nothing mattered, not anymore, but did that mean giving in to Rollins? Maybe. Maybe eventually. He just didn't know, and finally he climbed out of the shower, calmed but no less confused. As he toweled himself off, he heard a noise from somewhere in his apartment. What had that been, a door closing? He cracked the door and called out. You're still here, aren't you? Indeed I am. I'll be right there. Take your time, replied Rollins. Hey, where do you keep your knives? The silverware's in the drawer, beneath the coffee maker. No, the sharp ones. Oh, they're in the drawer left of the stove. So what was Rollins doing? Cooking breakfast? Things could be worse, thought Todd as he turned to the sink, lathered up his face, and began to shave. Actually, a good, solid breakfast. Some company and a calm morning were just what he wanted and needed. It would be only too great if Rollins and he could back up a bit and start the day from a different angle. Minutes later, Todd had tugged on his favorite blue jeans, the faded ones that gripped his body smoothly and snugly, and pulled on a dark blue t-shirt that hugged his chest. He ran his hands through his hair, ruffled things a bit, and started back to the kitchen, wondering what Rollins might be cooking. Todd took a deep whiff. He smelled only the rich aroma of coffee. Not even the warm scent of toast. Cereal? Was that to be the morning's fare? But then Todd entered the kitchen and found it empty. Rollins? He called rather desperately. Where are you? Shit, he thought, when his question was answered by silence. Rollins had left after all. Within the last few minutes, he'd slipped out. That wasn't what Todd had wanted. No, he realized the disappointment stinging him. He shook his head, dumped his now cold coffee down the drain. He hadn't realized it when he'd first gotten up, but this promised to be an extremely lonely morning. The phone, he thought, remembering his lifeline of human contact. As he crossed to it and flicked on the ringer, he checked the answering machine and saw that there were now 8 messages. What was all this about? It seemed odd that there'd be so many calls, particularly so early in the morning. His eyes was caught by an object, the brown bag, which still sat on the counter. Well, whatever Rollins had brought, at least he'd been decent enough to leave it. Stepping over to the bag, hungry for any kind of baked good, Todd peered in and found a hat, a crumpled Cubs hat. He reached in, pulled it out. What was this all about? That yours? Todd jumped, turned around, saw Rollins standing in the kitchen doorway, and said, Shit, you scared me. I'm sorry. I thought you'd left. No, just out on the balcony. Rollins nodded toward the hat. Is that your hat? Todd turned the cap in his hand and recognized the creases and folds, the faded tones, and the soft wool. All of it seemed familiar, except for one thing. I'd say sure, but mine doesn't have an orange spot like this. He glanced suspiciously at Rollins. Well, why? Someone found it down by Lake Calhoun. Then it's not mine, Todd replied, quickly. I haven't seen it in a while, but mine's probably in the closet. Which? The front hall one. Right there. Why? What difference does it make? Rollins didn't answer, instead turning around, stepping toward the closet and opening it. It was only then that Todd saw the large knife that Rollins was clutching in his right hand. What are you doing with that knife? Todd demanded. Rollins ignored the question, peered into the closet, pushed aside a few coats, and said, "There's no hat in here." "It's on the shelf, if it's there." "Nope, nothing." Rollins turned around, pointed with the knife at the hat in Todd's hand. "That's got to be yours, doesn't it?" "What the hell are you getting at?" "And this is your knife, isn't it?" "Of course it is. You just took it out of the drawer." Todd didn't like any of this, and he stepped toward Rollins, his hand extended. "Give it back. I don't know what you're getting at, but I don't like it." "Someone was killed last night." "What?" "Or rather early this morning. Right out there by Lake Calhoun. Right by Blowjob Beach. You can even see the spot from your balcony." "What the hell are you talking about?" demanded Todd. Rollins nodded at the cap. "And they found that by the body. That orange spot is the guy's blood. The crime lab ran a test." His eyes wide with shock. Todd stared at the hat he held. The next minute he threw it on the counter. "It's not my hat," Todd said quickly. "They took some hair samples, so they'll be able to tell for sure." "It can't be mine." "What if it is?" Well, then someone took it from me. Someone came in here and stole my hat." Todd remembered throwing it on the floor at Michael's. "Actually, I haven't seen it since that night Michael and I fought," Rollins asked bluntly. "Todd, where were you last night?" "What are you talking about?" demanded Todd. "I was at the Gay Times, then at Michael's, and then here. Here, fucking you, remember?" "What about after?" "Are you kidding? I was asleep. I didn't even move until 10 minutes before you showed up." "Are you sure you didn't make a..." Don't even dare suggest it." A horrible realization whooshed through him. This entire morning was coming all too quickly into focus. "Holy shit," said Todd. "That's why you're here, isn't it? You didn't come here to coo in my ear. You came to check me out. See if you could find anything. Well, I don't have any scratches, do I? No bruises either. Nothing except maybe some of your little paw marks." "Todd, you need to... Get out! You can either tell me everything or we can haul you downtown." "Great! You take me in for questioning, and I'll tell them, among other things, that you're a size queen," threatened Todd, referring to Rollins' penchant for well-endowed men. "I bet the guys downtown would get a bang out of that, so to speak." "Todd, if we bring you in, the press will be all over you. They'll eat up whatever's left of your career. You'll be completely ruined." "I'll tell you this much," snapped Todd in disgust. "I don't know anything about anyone getting killed last night. I wasn't down at Lake Calhoun now. Give me my knife and get out of my home." Rollins raised the gleaming blade, saying, "Someone was murdered with a long knife. Perhaps one just like this." "Get out! Get the fuck out of here!" Todd charged forward. "I can't take this, and I don't have to. Now leave." "Not until you tell me how your hat got down there." "Well, why don't you tell me where you went after you left here last night?" "Actually, that's a pretty good idea. How the hell do I know you didn't head down to the lake and do a little trolling?" "Well..." Rollins flushed red with anger, standing only inches in front of him. Todd saw the other man's hand tighten on the handle of the knife. Todd's hand shot through the air, grabbing the knife by the blade as he shouted, "Give me that!" He wrenched the knife from Rollins, stormed past him, and yanked open the door, saying, "Get the fuck out!" Rollins stared at him, but instead of leaving, he ducked into the kitchen, where he snatched the Cubs hat and stuffed it back into the paper bag. "What the hell are you doing?" demanded Todd, letting go of the open door and hurrying back to the kitchen. "This is a piece of evidence." But what? It's yours. I thought you said it wasn't." He glanced in the bag and shrugged. "Sorry, I've got it now. You want to try and stop me?" "You've got a knife. Go ahead. I dare you." "Just get the hell out of here and leave me alone." Without further words, Rollins heaved past Todd and out the door. Charging after him, Todd twisted the bolt shut and stood there flushed with anger. A moment later, he sensed a hot, wet sensation in his right hand, looked down and saw a steady stream of blood curling from his hand down the shiny blade of the knife. "Shit," he muttered. He started for the kitchen, but just then the phone began ringing. Todd threw the knife on the counter, grabbed a kitchen towel, wrapped it around his hand, and picked up the phone on the third ring. "What?" he snapped. "Jesus Christ, Todd. Where the hell have you been?" demanded a voice. "Who is this?" "It's me, Janice, you idiot. I've been calling you all morning. Didn't you get my messages? All 5 of them?" I turned my phone off and... "Listen, you got to get down here. We have a problem. Or I should say you do. You've heard the news, haven't you?" Todd tightened the towel around his hand. "Rollins was just here." "Oh, God. Officially or unofficially?" "That's a good question." "Well, get your butt down here right away. We've got to figure out what's going on." Todd replied, "Janice, if I didn't know better, I'd say someone was trying to frame me." Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.